Hey everyone, it's Rob with Rob B's Reef, and today we're going to talk about Quanta Pros and ReefFi UNOs. So normally I don't do much in the way of equipment reviews. I feel a lot of other good YouTube reefers out there do this well, and they're very good at it. I don't want to oversaturate the equipment review market. On top of that, I don't feel comfortable reviewing equipment that I haven't had my time on with regards to experience. And time isn't, I unbox it and put it over my tank for a month. I've got plenty of time under these lights here. I got the version 1 of the ReefFi UNO back in October of 21, and then I got my hands on a V2 in March of 22. The Quanta Pros that I've got over here, 3 of them, I have had those over my tank since March of 22. So that's basically 12 months and 18 months respectively across all these lights. So I feel a little bit more comfortable in talking about my experience and giving you my opinions. In no way is this sponsored at all. I paid full price for these lights. I didn't get any special considerations. So this is 100% my unbiased opinion. All right, so in this video, beyond just talking about my general overall experience and some of the interesting specifications that I think you might get a value out of with my experience on these lights, I'm going to talk about PAR measurements. And what we're going to do for PAR measurements here, I'm not going to create a comprehensive PAR map. I'm going to take 3 points along the sand bed in the front of the tank and 3 points along the top of the rocks in the middle of the tank. I'll do that for the Mazel Blues, the Tropic Suns, then I'll do it for all of the ReefFi UNOs combined, and then I'll do it as a collective so you can see overall what everything together works as. I'm going to do the same thing using a PAR-wise photo spectrometer, or color spectrometer, whatever you want to say that is. It's something new out there. I've got this in recently, and I will be learning how to use that. So apologies if I don't get everything right here the first time, but it's not that I don't believe any of the metrics or the information that the manufacturers have posted online. I just thought it would be an interesting thought exercise to see what I see comparatively as to what information they provide. I fully believe that the information they provide is true and accurate. And then I'd like to take you through aesthetic visualization. I might have to play around with that a little bit using maybe my phone or something like that, try to adjust what you see on the camera to be more what I have in tune in my eyes in person. Difficult on this Canon EOS Mark II that I use. So apologize if my tank back there doesn't look maybe as true to life as it would normally with the eyes, but I think most of you realize that have reef tanks what blues do to cameras. So that's what we're going to do in this video, and maybe a few other points along the way. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how I'm taking PAR in this video. I'm using an Apogee PQ510 package, which is something that includes a micro cache controller with Bluetooth connection to your phone and an SQ500 sensor. Sensor is an open air sensor, but the Apogee Connect software has immersion compensation that takes care of that math for you. It includes live data logging, calculates daily light integral, and you can export data. It's a pretty capable app overall. Note that the measurements that we're about to look at, starting with the Mazel Blues, are as is. All the points aren't equal in height or front to back. I have to work around the corals. This isn't a clean room PAR mapping exercise. This is just, hey, this is the data as it is in my tank based off of where I stuck the sensor. Using these lights, this is what you can achieve. The data points in parentheses are where I measured in the same spot with the PAR-wise meter. Some were close, some were off. Time will tell whether or not, it's user error, because this user doesn't know rat shit from Rice Krispies when it comes to the PAR-wise meter or light in general. I'm just reiterating my experience with this. I think it's a good enough meter for hobbyist level at this point. I'm pretty impressed with it overall. I'm sure it's got a lot of room to grow, but I'm not asking a lot of it. So I'd be really interested for anybody out there who's had experience with the PAR-wise to reach out in the comment section and tell me how it's been for you, what you've learned. I think this meter has a lot of potential into the future. All right, as it's relevant to a lot of things in this video, I wanted you to understand a little bit about how I run my light schedule. I run a typical 12-hour photo period. I run my lights particular from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The Quanta bars are non-dimmable, so I have to kind of simulate those. And again, not required for corals, right? Dimmable lights aren't required for corals. I don't care if they're on and then they're off. They either have light or they don't have light. They are important, however, for the fish that I have. If I was to go from dark pop on a Quanta bar, those things will scatter. It'll scare the shit out of them. So I don't like to do that, and I will start the day ramping out my Unos at 8 a.m. and they'll do a slow ramp all throughout the morning until noon. My peak hours are from 12 to 4, and then they're going to do a 4-hour ramp down until 8 p.m. My Quanta bars, I'll bring on in succession, 3 of them. I'll bring one on at 10, one on at 11, and one on at 12. I bring my Tropic Sun on at 12. And then I do an inverse at the end of the day, so I'll drop my Tropic Sun at 4 p.m., 5 p.m. another Meso Blue, and then the last one at 6. And of course, the Unos take care of the ramping from there. On that side of things, I feel that that gives me a pretty good look, balanced look and feel throughout the day. And then having that exposure to the inhabitants that I keep in my tank, to the par levels that they need, not too much for too long. None of my fish gets freaked out or startled by the way that I'm gradually bringing these things up and down throughout the day. Something I think that's important to note is what I like to call aesthetics. My eyes versus the coral's needs with regards to spectrum. So primarily you should be considered about coral health when you're picking your lights and the types of corals that you want to do that. This isn't a lecture on that, but it's important, I know in many of my conversations with reefers that I had, that what do those look like to your eyes? Because the tank is here for our visual appeal as well. Otherwise, why would we keep them in the first place? So what these lights bring to the table was a big deal to me as well, and considering the type of looks that I was going for. And I like a different approach to this in that I like to appreciate the coral pops using the blues and the actinics as much as possible, but I don't want that look all the time. I like to see fish, they think they present themselves better in a more white, natural light setting. So I went for best of both worlds in that aspect. So in the mornings, I'll be ramping a little blue. In the evenings, I'll be ramping a little blue. But during the day, in my peak hours from noon to 4, I'm running a pretty white spectrum so I can see both. And that's important to me. I'll be showing that, as I mentioned earlier, later on in this video. But for now, I'd also like to talk about light spill. And this is an issue we all are well aware of, and it can be, again, another large factor in determining how you enjoy your tank versus how you might not enjoy your tank or those living with you. These lights by far, I would say, have reduced the light spill into the room by half from what my previous setup was. Kessels and T5s, I had a lot of light spill in the room. Standing at the tank feeding the fish or working on it, I was constantly blinded by that. Or if I would sit and watch TV in the room, the light spill was terrible. These particular lights mounted about the same height as my previous setup, about between that 8 and 9 inch zone. The light spill is not bad at all. In fact, it's far superior to what I had in my previous setup. These lights do a good job of even blanketing, especially the Quantas. They really help round out the Unos. Not saying that the Unos don't have good spread, they do, but the Quanta bars is what I really love, and it brings that even blanket of light across there, but it does it in directing it downwards, but getting it in the space that it needs to be and not where it shouldn't be. Same thing for the Unos. You don't see a lot of that wide angle light spillage that you do in some of these other lights that are out there, and in my particular experience. So I will take you through what that kind of looks like, turn the lights off in the room, and we'll go through some of these different looks as far as each lights as you would see them to the best of my ability. Talk a little bit about light performance and what these bring to the table. The 6-foot or the 72-inch Quanta bars are rated at 107 watts, and I've got 3 of them, so that's pretty good. 324 watts total power there, and ramping them up and down gives me a good incremental spread throughout the day. The ReefFi UNO V1s are rated at 180 watts. Now keep in mind, I'm only running them peak wattage of 98 watts. From like noon to 4, thereabouts. And the ReefFi UNO V2s, they're at a crazy 270 watts, and I'm using them at a paltry 112 watts. So you're probably saying, hey, why did you get these lights if you're not using them? Well, I got them because, honestly, they were cheap and inexpensive, you want to call it maybe. I don't mind having that little bit of extra power. It means I'm not having to push a given piece of equipment to its maximum capability in order to achieve the results I'm wanting to use. With this setup and spread, I'm able to hit, upwards of 500 par at the top of my rocks using half of the output of these ReefFi UNOs along with the supplemental Quanta bars here. This is a win for me. Should I ever choose to evolve my reef keeping methods into a more SPS dominant type of a system, I have all the room I need right here to increase par if I need to. And I think 500 par for most SPS is probably pretty good. Not to mention that if I wanted to move into another tank, hey, I'm covered as well. With regards to performance, another type of discussion that's out there, and I'm not quite certain where I sit on this alone. Nobody's shown me any data that is undeniably proven that it's beneficial, but UVA, a lot of people talk about, hey, do your lights have UVA? The Quanta bars are not advertised or sold as UVA bars. They don't have enough par within that spectrum to be considered bringing that to the table. So the Quanta Pros will just say no UVA. However, the ReefFi UNOs, both V1 and V2, do bring some good UVA to the table. I believe they have about 35 watts of UVA that peak in the 395 to 400 nanometer range. So those lights, if you were a believer in UVA or you want to be covered in that respects, or you're into that type of experiment, the ReefFi UNOs definitely have you covered. All right, next up we have the readings that I took with the ParWise color spectrometer. I think it's made by ITC. Again, note ParWise versus Apogee par readings on here. The ITC ParWise meter has open air and submersible modes. I thought that was pretty interesting. I brought in published spectrums where they were available and relevant. So sometimes when we're talking about blended lights like Quantas and ReefFis together, there's no published spectrum when you use those because that's off the radar as far as how you're combining them with other lights. I thought this was an interesting learning exercise. But at this point, the spectrum definitely seems to be an approximation. But for me in my hobbyist level tank, that's good enough for the money I paid. I'm sure that this can be improved over time. Hopefully the sensor they included in it is good enough where they can attack the gap with software updates, and who knows how that'll look like over time. But at the 10% coupon code I had at, I think it was Premium Aquatics at the time, and I got this sensor for $270. I thought it was great. I'm really excited to use it, and it's going to inspire me to learn more about light. And I think that I learned a lot from what these lights look like under my tank. And if you're looking to purposely create a spectrum using lights that you can control that have individual channels, I mean, unlike the Quantas, which are a fixed spectrum, and that's fine, they're great, love them, they're doing what they're supposed to. But when you get into lights like Ecotech Marine, Aqua Illumination, ReefFi UNO, you can make a lot of different blended spectrums with that. But unless you're a real light expert, and I am not, do you really know what you're making and what you're putting out? So this is a pretty cheap tool, I think, to consider that you can create your own spectrums and then actually measure and get an approximation of what you're putting out the end and understand what you're doing. So I always say, if you can't measure it, how can you control it? But I don't know, this is an interesting thing, and I'd certainly like to hear what your thoughts are on the results here that I got. All right, next, let's talk a little bit about customer service. Both of these companies here provide excellent customer service in my experience. Not only in my direct experience, in a few other instances I've talked with other hobbyists, they had very similar experience. So consistency is always important. You're always going to hear those outliers of, oh, well, I had a lousy experience and then this person had another experience. I really haven't heard of too many outliers regarding these two vendors in particular. In the case of the Quantas, they got a 2-year warranty on the light bar itself and a 1-year warranty on the driver. I believe they have free ground shipping in the US. The owner, I think, Mahina Corals, is also a hobbyist and actively keeps reef tanks. So if you have questions about spectrum or aesthetics or anything like that, he can actually speak from experience, as he actively keeps and maintains his own tanks and knows what his lights look like over those tanks. And then he can also translate your requirements as well very easily. The Unos by ReefFi Lab, a crazy 3-year warranty. You don't see that too often in lights of that caliber. That's pretty impressive. Again, a very responsive individual. I haven't had to wait for more than 24 hours in most cases if I ever had to reach out with questions, and occasionally I had questions. And in the beginning, a primary example would have been when the V2s first came out. I was a pre-order. I think I got one of the first few units shipped out there, and kind of immediately noticed that the unit was running excessively hot, yet the fan was far from being able to run to the degree that it should have been. Gave him some of that feedback within, I think, 24 hours, maybe 36 hours at the most. He had a firmware update out there, and it addressed the thermal protection issue. And since then, the units have worked great. So ever since they've been over my tank, none of these units have ever had any maintenance issues. I haven't had any intermittent units not working. I have always been able to connect to the Unos via the local Wi-Fi app. We'll get into that a little bit in the section that I cover the application on. But in both cases, zero maintenance issues with any of these. Very good responsiveness from the manufacturers. And in the one case I had an issue, even before I even put it over the tank, he had it addressed. So a quick view of the mounting solution here, all 3D printed for the Quanta Pro bars. I simply put like a 3-piece type of a system where there's a horizontal bar that fits into the channel on the aluminum extrusion, and then 2 vertical bars that just slip over with 3D printed keeper pins. And then they go into the 3D extrusion slot on the Quanta Pro bars. And versus the ReefFi Unos, are more of a bolt-down top mount, M3 screws. It's a 2-piece assembly where the vertical bar slips in underneath of the horizontal crossbar, and then you bolt that down. And again, it's just slid into place, free form on the aluminum extrusion. Gravity holds it in place. And again, I can slide them to the sides. The Quanta bars I can move back and forth. Not that I'm inclined to move my lighting, but if it ever needed to happen, it's easy to disassemble, easy to adjust on the fly. So I really like the UNO interface. He's taken a different approach than I've seen on some other light manufacturers. It's all local Wi-Fi based. There's no cloud access to these lights, but personal opinion warning, cloud-based light control is pointless. Set your lights at home. If you need to turn them on and off for some reason, hook them up to a Wi-Fi power bar or your local controller, but you don't need to configure your lights remotely. That's just a little bit weird in my opinion. So that meets my expectation. He's got other great features like acclimation, pick a number of days, percentage of power, and it'll just count up. When I first got these, I'd set to like 120-day light acclimation schedule. I know ridiculously long, but I've got LPS and I was going for a really high number and it worked great, no problem. He's got a ton of preset configurations in there for different spectrums and visual looks. Those work great. And then you can even tweak them from there and then save a preset. You can export your settings, you can import settings. There's just a lot of individual things that you can do with those. Individual channels to control obviously the lights. It's really simple to access. You just type in an IP address on your phone and you access the web interface. You can see the IP addresses on the front of the units there. So if you ever forget it or lose it in your phone somehow, and just look at any one of them, you connect to one, you can see the rest of them. So they've got grouping features, auto detect. I'm really impressed with the interface there, and there really isn't too much that this interface brings to the table and it can't provide. The only downside is a little simplistic, and if you're accessing it on a phone, some of the controls are a pain in the ass to touch and click. If you wanted to change a time on a particular section, of your ramping schedule, it can be a little bit of pain to do that. So, from an interface UI perspective, it's not smooth and polished, and it's a little clunky to get through, but it's functional and it's easy to learn. He has really good documentation on his website on how to use the interface. So I don't typically ask for a lot, so I'm not expecting a lot, but here he did exceed my expectations from a functionality standpoint, and connecting to him originally, zero problems. You just connect to a local access point, provide your local Wi-Fi information, SSID, boom, you're off to the races. It's that simple. And once you have one in the network, it's even easier to get more on. All right, and finally we have the ReefFi UNO app. Type in your IP address. Any of the IP addresses that you have are fine. You can cycle through the individual lights that are on your network one at a time and make any adjustments that you need there. There's also an aquarium grouping that you can create. You can create as many groupings of lights as you want at the top and set all those lights to a group accordingly. And then there, of course, is the group settings. You can auto scan, assign lights to groups, various things like that. Overall, a pretty feature-rich settings. We have the Wi-Fi configuration page. If you ever have a problem with your Wi-Fi, you can force an access point. You can set your units up to your SSID and password. Works pretty straightforward. And of course, we have time settings, plenty of opportunities to set your local time zones, general information page, current operating systems, firmware, all that good stuff. And I love this page, firmware update. Oh, look, I'm behind an update, so I better get on that this weekend. Otherwise, it's automatically always looking for the latest firmware. I like that. LED configurations, you can load defaults, you can export your settings, you can import other people's settings or previous ones. It's pretty useful. And then, of course, general system tools like clear groups, recalibrate your fan, auto Wi-Fi settings, clearing your Wi-Fi settings, reboots, and all that good stuff. There's plenty of functionality in here to maintain your UNOs and access it in any way you need to. And then, of course, back to the group setting, looking at how do you set up and configure a light schedule. You can click on a given schedule slot. You can see what the peak wattage is in that given time frame, set the start time. You can load pre-configured settings based on wattages and spectrums. It'll show you the spectrum. You can tweak those after the fact to anything that you want if you don't want to use the defaults. You can add new schedules, and then, of course, select a configuration, configure it yourself, set a time slot. Clicking on the overall, what I call the current setting, you can see what it's currently drawing for watts, and then when you click on that, you can set your acclimation schedule for the overall day. So you just type in a number of days you want and the percentage of the overall peak schedule for that given time frame. So while there's a lot going on in here, the documentation on ReefFi Lab's website is pretty solid. Just walk through it, and it's pretty self-explanatory for the most part once you step through it. So in conclusion, I'm super happy with my choice. Not only did I save a ton of money in having to change my lights over, that can be kind of an expensive type of proposition, but my original light solution wasn't working for me at all. Nothing was thriving. I was struggling getting power numbers up. Frustrated by the fact that I had to change bulbs. I was, listening to too much talk on the forums and didn't follow the thoughts in my own head. I was just, following chatter by other people instead of thinking it through. So I'm much happier. Don't have to worry about the aging issues with T5 bulbs or the availability of those. These are more of a forever solution in my mind that I can expand on and grow, because I'm not maxing out the power in these lights to achieve what I want in my tank. So I have plenty of ceiling to expand to a new tank or develop this tank into something else down the road. Reefing journeys are an evolving kind of thing. You're not stagnant or static in any way. So having to get what I think is premium performances and expectations out of budget price lights was a win-win in my scenario. I think I hate paying for names and I hate paying for other people's marketing. And these are two companies that don't spend a lot of money in marketing, and you can see it in their pricing. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to help anybody who is curious about these things, or maybe if you're just a little bit hesitant on jumping in a less familiar product that doesn't get as much spotlight by some big reefing out there. These deliver 100%. Understanding where the power is in my tank has helped me also succeed. So make sure you get a power measure or a power meter. I highly recommend that, especially for a larger tank where you've got a lot of corals, and placement is of major importance. So if you have any questions, again, reach out, subscribe to my channel if you find this interesting, and stay tuned. I'm going to be trying to do a lot more videos this year. Hopefully some of them are interesting. If you have any suggestions or videos that you'd like to see, let me know and put those in the comments below.